map of the whole of the UK, which would then be supplied towards local authorities who would then use it for planning. This was early stage of the OpenStreetMap, and what this project looked at, and as we can see here, Jeremy Morley, who was the director of the Centre of Geospatial Science, now Chief Technology Advisor at the Ordnance Survey, basically says the rise of OpenStreetMap was one of the transformative stories of the previous decade. However, there remain barriers to the professional analytical use connected with issues of data quality. So the idea of this project was to address this through extracting the data from the Ordnance Survey master map, running some data validation against it and fixing it. So we're talking about connecting roads together, preventing overlapping buildings and stuff. So this was done back in 2009 to 2011. So back to modern day. Obviously, we've seen as a community, the OpenStreetMap team still has this validation issue, and we've taken massive bounds in the past few years with the Tasking Manager allowing the validation process to come alive. So actually, in about half an hour, the Cambridge guys are going to kick off first mapathon without me there, so we'll see how that goes. I'm sure they're going to be amazing. It's going to be great. But over the past year or so, we've held all over Cambridge. Last time we were in a beer garden, and we held it with purely 4G hotspots, which went amazingly quite well, which was a bit worrying at times. But so Cambridge missed Maxians. So what we've seen, we get 40 or so people turn up every month, and there's been over 200 people who have attended since we started. All of these guys, majority of them anyway, are new mappers. And if you watch the State of the Map presentations back in Japan a few months ago by Mapbox, you would have said that their analysis shows that 60% of change sets to the OpenStreetMap, the issues are found with new mappers. So as the community keeps on growing, the importance of validation also keeps on growing. So why validate? So taking examples from Janet Chapman here, and also the wider community. Basically, inconsistent, inaccurate, incomplete, out-of-date data results in poor decisions, biased statistics, and poor use of human and economic resources. So one example is that if you've got your road network and it looks visually connected, but it's ever so slightly off, then if you get your route planning algorithms, then you're going to be diverted on the wrong way. Now this is important from a humanitarian point of view, because if you are incorrectly calculating the fuel requirements, for instance, then you may put the incorrect amount of aid into your truck, which means you haven't got a very efficient way of distributing the aid. Similarly, on the mail area spraying campaigns as well, if you do have poorly analysed houses, then it's harder to do the spraying campaigns. And finally, if you've got loads of overlapping buildings, then when you do the data analysis of population density, that will potentially result in you going to the least populated areas first. And so it's all about making the logistics of aid planning more efficient. So I'm sure you're familiar with this. This is Tasking Manager 3 coming out. That's just taking some strides to improve this as well. But this is a very common scenario on the left. So you've got a backlog in validation with the bottleneck of the process. So the community's growing massively, which is great, which means that loads of tasks are getting towards 100% done. But then we're looking about only, in this task, 31% of tasks validated. And if you noticed on the hot messaging boards yesterday, in fact, the Mexican earthquake can't release that data until that data has been validated. So all these mappers can do all this work, but if it hasn't been said is correct, then it can't be used by aid agencies. So if there's a way of speeding this up, that would be perfect. So quick explanation of what I'm proposing here. So you've got the Raster and Vector validation. So we're not going to focus on the Raster side, so we're going to say we still need to check that there are buildings that have been mapped successfully. So we still need to check the areas for missing buildings, for instance. But what we're talking about is vector validation. So your little tiny slivers in your data, which means it's not connected, your little spikes in the data, which means you're incorrectly analysing routes, overlapping buildings, resulting in different population calculations. So all these little things that potentially there is a way of either semi-automating or automating in order to fix up the data. So a few of you might have met Ralph. Good old Ralph, he's a great guy. He came to our event last month in Liverpool, actually. But this is, if you do the training, this is the training workflow that you currently have. So you choose your tool, you open your JOSM, you say whether it's valid or not. So you say yes, and then you commit that, and that is good, and it's applied to the NGOs. You say no, and that means it has to be validated and fixed. Now, all of this process is a very manual process. Now, there are potential ways of speeding this up. So there's tools built in JOSM. So we're talking about the validation tool, which is really good. In fact, it can highlight a lot of issues in the data quite nicely. So your disconnected roads, your overlapping buildings are highlighted on the map. But what you still have to do is you have to individually zoom into these regions and manually fix it. So if you've got a disconnected road, you have to zoom to that disconnected area, you have to snap it, and then have to split it. Now, you can automate this potentially. I mean, there's some lessons we've learned from the past when working with OpenStreetMap data in terms of making sure that it is valid. But the JOSM tool is really good at the moment for this. And also community mobilisation. So it's all about increasing the amount of people who are validating on one side. So we've got some lovely tweets on your Validation Friday. Pete Masters did his Hey Jude impression of validation. But there's some lovely tweets there. I mean, so it's great effort from like the whole community, Pete Masters, Matthew Gibb, Rebecca as well, and everyone involved. But what we're seeing is that this is increasing the amount of people contributing to validation, which is great. It means you're going to complete tasks quicker, but there's also the technology side as well, which you can bring. So OSM chart, thanks to the Mapbox guys who have given us an example of the work that you guys have taken part in, is one of the tools which have been created, which is basically looking at individual chain sets and finding areas where there have been buildings added, modified, and deleted. So this is great work by these guys in terms of analysing from an individual scale how the data has been analysed, and that can speed up the process. But this is still a manual check, so you would visualise it and then you would zoom in and fix it manually. So if you look on the quality assurance page, you can see there's over 30 quality assurance tools that are used by the OpenStreetMap community. So they're designed to check for potential errors, inaccuracy, and sparsely mapped places. The tools are often designed to fix individual issues and highlight specific areas as well. But there's not as such a centralized rule-based validation logic. So you have maybe 40 or so different actions in JOSM and also in Osmos and KeepRight. But we can keep on building upon what is currently there and keep on adding more and more to this basic data dictionary. And if we have a proper data dictionary available, which we can gain through communication between technology partners and also the hot community and the users of the data, if you have this community joining together, we can really start to build up a proper centralized rules logic, which a lot of commercial partners have. So we work with a specific satellite agency who are using OpenStreetMap data as part of their day-to-day process. But in order to get into their systems, the data has to abide by every single rule in their rules catalogue, which goes on for maybe 1,000 or so different business rules, which built up over time. Now we're helping that company implement these business rules and to automatically basically do an ETL transfer, so you're extracting the data from OpenStreetMap, transforming it to their data model and then putting it in the database. If we have this centralized rules logic from like the base level, the OpenStreetMap level, is going to help the whole community and all users of OpenStreetMap. So I won't go too high level, this is too in-depth, but there's potential 2 areas of improvement we've highlighted. First one is potentially at a data input level. So you are fixing your data when you are actually inputting it into OpenStreetMap. Now in the past we've had conversations with the OpenStreetMap community about that, and sometimes the community are a bit adverse to putting fixed data back in when it hasn't been checked. So this is where lessons can be learned, and we can talk about semi-automation. And the second part is looking at the HDX architecture or any other supplier of data, basically. I'll just take this example here, where the Humanitarian Data Exchange extracts the raw data from OpenStreetMap. Let's call it like a data lake, but I think that's the proper term potentially. So you've got your raw data there which hasn't been fixed, and they extract it and they put it into a database. And when they're putting into that database, you're validating the data and fixing up at that stage. So that's potential there of adding business rules here. But as I said earlier, if we can get a data dictionary together, then you can add it at this stage, or you can add it at this stage. The rules will be transferable between all the data. So think this is, you've got your Open Tasking Manager, you're extracting the data in your database. So you say, I want to map an ID. At a basic level, that will extract the data from the database. You then transform it by adding your buildings and your roads, and then once you're happy with that, you commit it back and press save. So that's the load format. Now, potentially, what we're saying is, I come up with a bit of a demo in the slides, but you can extract the boundary of each task. You can then automate or semi-automate the validation process. So you run these business rules against the data that you've extracted, and that will automatically fix the data, or semi-automate where you can visualize it, and once you're happy with that, you can load it back up. So it's basically following the same processes we have at the moment, but instead of everybody just manually fixing the data, you run these business rules and it fixes it automatically. There's potential there. I was a bit cheeky and nicked this OS quality guaranteed slide, but that was from the State of the Map conference as well. So thanks to the area of interest analysis guys at the talk as well. But if we can define this, then every bit of data used by the whole community will be reliable and really help the humanitarian guys on the ground to distribute aid, for instance. Now, something I mocked together, we have a rules-based software which basically extracts data from OpenStreetMap. You can then run it against these business rules to analyze the data, and in this area here we have highlighted on the map all of the overlapping buildings. Now, as well as just highlighting on the map, you can also fix the data, and then you can run the validation again, and you will see that on the left here we have overlapping buildings. Before the title was run was 94%. You then run the actions, and then afterwards you run the rule again, and it says overlapping buildings conforming to 100%. So all the features were fixed. So that's a basic scenario there. This is, by the way, using REST API. I can explain techie bit next if anybody would like. But, so the first time you go to a mapathon, every single time people are like, square your buildings, square your buildings. And you're like, oh, okay. We've got a guy called Bjorn Hassler, who Janet knows quite well. He's always like on Slack or something and say, square your buildings. This user hasn't squared his buildings. So, in this example, I thought I'd just show you some squaring of some buildings. I mean, it's not the most important bit that I'll go through, but if you look carefully, you have to look quite carefully. This is beforehand, and then we can run an algorithm through which has squared the majority of the buildings. You can edit the parameters in order to make sure that you've got your squaring 100% correct, because this is completely customizable. And then you can add your nodes back in to ensure the topology is maintained. And then you would use something like GeoGig, for instance, to load the data back into OpenStreetMap. Now, more importantly, I'm talking about road topology. So this is your route guidance going from A to B. Now, in this area here that we've just put in QGIS, you can see that we've run a rule against data, and we've seen that we've looked for disconnected highways. Now we can see that 98% of the highways are connected, but 2% aren't. And visually checking that, it's hard to. So JOSM can highlight this at the moment, but it can't automatically fix that. So what you can do is we can zoom to the map, and here you can see it's disconnected. That's like half a meter. But this is significant because this data is disconnected, which means your routing algorithms won't work. So what you can do, you can run some topology tasks against the data, and instead of having to fix it manually, you can run the task through, and it will snap the data back. Now this, and then you run your rules again, and you can see that disconnected highways are 100%, so any analysis of the data will go correctly through the routing algorithms. Now, I'm sure a lot of you may have heard of John Whelan from the messaging boards. He talks about the validation tool, or a requirement for a validation tool, quite a lot. And the majority of the time it is to do with attributional differences in the data. And I will talk about Janet's stuff in a sec as well. So in this example, 264 buildings were put as yes with 2 S's, which means that if you extract that data and you say, I want to extract all the buildings in this area, these buildings won't be extracted. So if you create some maps and some analysis against this data, you won't be taking these into account. So these guys won't be there. So it's really important to get validation here, and currently there's a bit of lack of attributional checks in the data. Now, if we can define this business rules at the data dictionary level, then potentially we can prevent this from happening. So there we go. Promised Janet I'll put this up. But this is something that Tanzania Development Trust and the Crowd2Map project are currently working on. So Janet's guys have got like a micro grant where they send communities out in order to do basically on-the-ground mapping of all of their areas and to add local detail. So they've gone out a few times, added the detail, but what we can see here is that actually a lot of the times when you visualize and print the maps, we've got like Kayela motorbike repairs put down as a village, and Victory's Church put down as a village, and Congo drought season put down as a village. I mean, it's not very useful maps. So if we look at the data level, we can see in this example here, we have 2 villages next to each other with identical names, which means if you visualize that map and you print it out, then the guys at the NGO level will see that this village Masinga is populated twice. And so you're not getting very accurate results. And on a similar level, this is another bit, is where you have all of these different areas here. So there's these pitch ground highlighted as a village, milling highlighted as a village. So if you printed this out on the map, you're not going to get good results either. So we need a way of finding this. This is a bit of an issue at the moment in terms of the Maps.me side as well, because there is no validation of the Maps.me data. There's validation of everything we do as OpenStreetMap on the Tasking Manager side. But if guys go out into the street with Maps.me, they can add this data and potentially it does not get analysed. And that has a serious impact if the hot team want to analyse this data and print out the maps I'm using. So I think we're having a discussion with Chad tomorrow. So he's leading out in terms of the validation side of there. So potentially we can talk through this as well. So last 2 slides. I've told you I've talked through the Humanitarian data exchange functionality. So this is taken from their quality assurance framework, where they take OpenStreetMap data as raw data, and they will put it into a separate database. And then this separate database is a number of validation rules that run against that. I think there's a number of Python tools which are created by some workers on their side. But this is basically bypassing the OpenStreetMap community, putting it in a separate database, fixing the data with that stage, and then supplying it to the humanitarian guys on that side. So this is potentially a different way where, instead of validating at the OpenStreetMap side, you validate at the data exchange. So finally, I suppose I'm here to start the community conversation about how we can speed up the validation process. The technology is there, and there are people doing this, commercial companies using these systems all the time, but we just need a way of bringing it together and getting a proper validation process set up, and that way we can increase the speed and we can ensure the consistent accuracy, complete and current data is secured. We also need to talk about the community side as well. It's important to have the validators there. We're not talking about replacing the validating community at all. We're talking about helping those guys along and improving the process and ensuring that data is delivered to the guys on the ground quicker, and that we deliver high quality mission critical data to the guys there. So in summary, we can go faster, and hopefully we can increase the amount of tasks which are completed at 100%. Finally, any questions? By the way, if you want to find my details, don't miss out. And for those who are interested, Cambridge is there. Thank you very much.
What was the name of the QGIS tool that you're using for highways and nodes?
So it's part of our software called OneIntegrate. We've very recently released a REST API for it. That's still in beta though, so it'll be released soon. And from that REST API, you can build any tool within using Python, for instance. So we got one of our guys to basically create that tool. But it all relies on this OneIntegrate software in the background.
Question, you said that over 60% of errors would be in the edits of, say, new members.
Yeah.
If that's the case, shouldn't it be possible or useful to both do validation on target and say these are people that need help, that need coaching?
So
does that what happens?
So the guys at Mapbox creating the OSM chart have actually, you can visualize how often the map maps. And so that is where you can target specific new maps, for instance. And also I know the Tasking Manager 3 also shows how many change sets a mapper has contributed to. So yes, there's areas of specifically targeting that. But if you can combine the existing tools with other methods, then you can improve it even further. Sorry.
Sorry, Steve, thank you very much. I'm really interested in the metadata side of what you were talking about in the HTX part.
Yeah.
The thing that strikes me, so we do a lot of work in Somalia, and we're trying to use OSM to help coordinate with implementing partners like the UN. The thing I see that I think is a major issue is I see OSM as a great canonical source for location. Mm-hmm. Say for like where is a health facility, where is a school, where's a clinic, water point. But it's not probably the best place for the meta information to sit. So even if you're cleaning HDX, it's going to be immediately out of date versus pointing to the government of Somalia's Ministry of Health site that has information on that health facility. So what are the thoughts on linking? So having tags where you link to an external source that provides meta information for a place, instead of having OSM be an out-of-date meta store for the world.
I see.
I see there's a lot of value in updating the metadata because it's a huge issue and it's completely, doesn't make any sense. If you look at it closely.
So in terms of, I think I highlighted the attributional side as the major issue, and that's what you were mentioning when you mean metadata, I suppose.
Well, the tags,
Yeah, the tags basically. So the major issue lies in the tags, and I totally agree. Now, I talked about the potential of adding these business rules together in order to ensure that, we talked about John's yes with 2 S's. You can write a bit of code to just say yes or no. There should be a business rule in there that prevents you from putting yes or no in. In terms of extracting from external sources, I think it's difficult from a database level, I suppose, because you would have to link to different databases, but I suppose you could extract the attributes through some kind of URL, for instance.
Well, I'm suggesting you don't extract.
Oh, you just link it.
You just point as a reference.
So you point.
So if you want to do analysis, I can pull all the locations, and this location would have information pointing to some registry externally.
So potentially, if you can link to data, then feasibly you can extract the data from it.
I think we have to take the discussion over.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here for the next few days. So.
I also wanted to mention as well, tonight we have another talk as well. Most of that Canadian River's working on to support the mixed earthquake activation. And where if you are already experienced in validation, please join us. And we also have a lot of experienced people there, so if you want to find out more about validation, there are a lot of people there, so we happy to show you. Yeah, so hope to see you there in the Canadian. And now we have the lunch breaks. We have